During the 1980s, we see many different software publishing houses develop games for our microcomputers, namely the Commodore 64. Only a few of those has really stood the test of time. Developing some of the very best Commodore 64 games, Thalamus had lots to offer. So this is going to be every single game Thalamus developed during that era of the 1980s until the early 1990s. I'm going to be rating each game in their library from worst to best. Enjoy. Released back in 1990 and coded by Paul O'Malley with Mark Clements producing the music, Heatseeker is a strange mixture of scrolling platformer with an almost Sinclair ZX Spectrum aesthetic, which was originally released on tape and diskette. It has a mixed audience. On one hand, Commodore 64 fans were confused by its concept, as were others praised it for its uniqueness. The aim of Heatseeker is to use the flames to warm up the ball, which is semi-attached to the player's mechanical leg. A truly obscure title which has an odd control mechanics. Winter Camp is the next game that released 2 years after Summer Camp. The game was coded by John Ferrari with Mark Clements producing the game's music. Winter Camp has around 8 different games or mini-games, some of which can be a little confusing to grasp at times and falls under the fusion of arcade with puzzle elements genre. Graphically, for a 1992 release, the game looks as a standard title from this era, if not a little nicer than other games of this cutesy platformer variety. All in all, Winter Camp isn't a bad game, but certainly not the best that Thalamus has to offer. Unlike Winter Camp, Summer Camp is a 1990 multi-screen action platformer that I think is a little better than what Winter Camp had to offer 2 years later. With John Ferrari coding and Mark Clements producing a soundtrack, the difficulty level of Summer Camp is certainly a learning curve, but with its cartoon-style animation in chunky, colourful sprites, I think the difficulty level can to some extent be forgotten. Controls for the game are a little on the pixel-perfect side, but once getting used to this, platformer fans should have fun for 10 minutes with Summer Camp for sure. Released in 1986 and being the first ever Thalamus game released, Sanxion made a very good impression for a then up-and-coming new Commodore 64 label. For fans of the horizontal shooting genre, Sanxion is a title produced by Stavros Foulous, who later went to produce a couple more titles for Thalamus. The game itself has a very nice touch by having 2 screens whilst playing. The top screen will display oncoming enemies, whereas the bottom screen is ready to shoot. Sanxion was also the first game to feature the Cyberload loader. Of course, not as great as other shooters such as Enforcer, but still a very good game which holds up okay today with very tight controls. Snare consists of 20 stages which are grouped together in sets of 4. Controlling a futuristic glider of some description, its aim is to enter each stage by finding a star. It is a multi-scoring shoot 'em up that has puzzle elements incorporated. Similar to Heatseeker, Snare has a mixed audience of fans. Some who praise it for its technical programming by Bob Stevens, and some who just weren't sure of its concept and ideas. I had a lot of fun with Q-Dex. It is a puzzle maze game by Stavros, at which point Q-Dex was his third published game. At first it's a little confusing, but you can get to grips with it fairly quickly. Collect keys which opens doors and find entrances to transparent blocked areas. The good thing with Q-Dex is having the option to choose between stages. I found sprite movement very fluid when controlling the ball and reminds me of Bounder and Rebounder. A great release for 1987 and of course had an amazing score by Matt Gray. Q-Dex was later ported to the Amiga, MS-DOS and the TRS-80. The first thing you'll likely notice in Hawkeye is a totally awesome soundtrack by Jerome Tell, who produced some of the C64's finest music, including Robocop 3 and both of the Cybernoid games. Hawkeye is a 1988 arcade platformer shoot 'em up that holds many fond memories of C64 owners of the time. A fairly solid title where the player must find 4 individual pieces of puzzle to enter the next stage. Hawkeye kind of reminds me of the Flimbo's Quest idea, but of course Hawkeye is more grittier, that sees the player controlling a half-man, half-robot hybrid. Hawkeye is a great fun game, although it can get very samey after a few stages of playing. Delta was Stavros Rousseau's second game published by Thalamus in 1987 and has earned itself a fairly good reputation since being one of the best horizontal shoot-'em-ups on the C64. The game is incredibly slow-paced to begin with by shooting down enemies. New blocks will open which can be flown into once enough points have been collected. If you fancy a game where collision detection is off, Delta isn't for you. It is a difficult learning curve, but once powered up, this game is a good one for space shooter fans. Rob Hubbard was also responsible for its music, so altogether a very nice package which still holds up well today. I first played Nobby the Aardvark when it features as a demo on a Commodore format Power Pack cassette back around 1991. It was challenging to play back then just like it is today. Don't let this game fool you with its animations and cutesy backdrops. This game can certainly be cruel. Developed by Genesis Software, who also produced 3 other games for Codemasters in 1991, it has a great soundtrack by Ashley Hogg, and I think it is one of the best platformer releases for the genre that released back in 1992. It has a very level design and fairly tight control response. Highly recommended for fans of this style of game. With an awesome soundtrack by Matt Gray, Hunter's Moon is likely the best multi-scoring shoot-'em-up in the Thalamus library and was recently even remastered. To cut the story short, you are sucked into a black hole and warped to another galaxy where you must shoot down star cells in order to beat the game. It's a fairly addictive game and very much unique for 1987. Very tight control mechanics and just plain fun to play. The scroll screen moves fluently and includes some of the best sprite animations for the time this was released. To be honest, over the years, Retrograde has been on my to-play list, but never got around to it until last night. In some respects, it's similar to Defender, but seems a little better. Some will likely dislike its monotonous gameplay, and others will praise its addictiveness. I enjoyed shooting down spaceships and other random space objects in order to collect currency to power up my weapons in the shop. Oddly enough, I did feel that the player's character looked very similar to the characters in the Cyberdyne Warrior game. If you're a fan of Defender, you would likely enjoy Retrograde too. Check this one out. Two of my favourite horizontal space shoot-'em-ups for the C64 is Catalypse and Armorlight. Armorlight can be seen as a generic space shooter of this genre, but this one from 1988 seemed to have something different. Similar to R-Type, where you can use an attachment to take down enemies, Cytronic even re-released it around 10 years back. I am sure most C64 fans would have heard or played Armorlight at this point. If you haven't, be aware it is certainly a challenge but features some very amazing power-ups. As a reader of Commodore Format magazine back in the early 1990s, Creatures was constantly being advertised and praised, but never got around to playing it until around 15 years back. It is a masterpiece in Commodore 64 platforming, and it is actually named Clyde Radcliffe. It exterminates all the unfriendly, repulsive, earth ridden slime. Produced by Apex Computer Productions, two brothers who later went on to produce the only 64 game to ever score 100%. Creatures is a platformer shooter where collecting things will ultimately gain you power ups. Just like Armorlight, Creatures also received a modern day release by Cytronic Software. Okay, you knew this was coming, didn't you? Although I am terrible at Creatures too, I can see that it's a solid platforming puzzler with gorgeous animations and awesome use of programming techniques. And to many, including myself, Creatures 2 is near the top of the best ever C64 games ever released. It features scenes of gore, humour, and very addictive gameplay with a range of backdrops, which also includes snow stages, which admittedly I have never made it to, but the thought is there, and maybe one day I will finish Creatures too.